Hey, welcome back, everybody. Is there anyone in this auditorium that does not know the name Richard M. Dolan? Anyone? Oh my God, I actually see a hand. All right, for your benefit, sir. Richard Dolan is a historian, okay? He's a guy that goes into the archives and toils. He's a guy that reads histories. He's a guy that goes out and gets first-person testimonies, okay? He spends his life looking at the hard evidence, and he sorts through it, and then he chronicles it. Guys, this is like a Bible of UFO history. And Richard Dolan is the man that we have to thank for this, the definitive work. Volume 1 a few years ago, now the new one, The Cover-Up Exposed, covering the years 73 through 91. If there is anyone that you know that has doubts the veracity of what is going on, the amount of evidence in the covers of these two volumes, no one can read it with an open mind and walk away not knowing that something is going on for real. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the man, Richard Dolan.
Thank you, Bob. Appreciate it. Hello, good evening, good afternoon, I should say, and thank you, Bob. It's a bittersweet moment for me to be here, to be able to speak with you today, because as you all know, this is the last time that the International UFO Congress will be here in Laughlin, Nevada, run by Bob Brown and his wonderful daughter Nikki, and formerly by Terry Brown. And it's going on to new and I'm sure a bright future, with open minds starting next year. But this is the close of an era, and I've had a little bit of a part of that for the last few years. I've spoken here. I think this is possibly my 5th time. And in fact, the first time I ever spoke anywhere in public was at this conference in 2001. I'll never forget it. I was so nervous. A week before the conference, I wasn't even scheduled to speak. And my first volume was brand new at that time. And I was sitting alone in my office, and I got a phone call from Bob Brown, who I didn't really know. And he said, well, we've heard a little bit about you, and we're inviting you to speak at our conference. And I thought, well, that's pretty neat. I think I'll do that. I said, well, when is it? And he said, next week. And I said, well, all right, I'll do that. And we hung up, and I said, well, how long do you need me to go? And he said, well, about 90 minutes will be fine. And I said, that's great, great. I hung up the phone, and I said, what do I do now? I didn't even have PowerPoint. I just went out there. I wrote a thing. I wrote this long, whatever. Wrote it out. Could you imagine? Who reads things? So I had this stack of papers, and I go out there. I read my presentation. And I remember before I went out there, too, I was behind the screen. I got this introduction. I can't remember what was said. My heart was like this, coming out of my chest. Sorry, I shouldn't have done that. But it was great. It was a wonderful experience. There's always a very special place in my heart for the Laughlin Conference. And the other thing about this type of a conference, compared with any other place where you go to hear about this type of a topic, is that there's the MUFON conference, the International UFO Symposium. And MUFON, as many of you know, tries to promote what they will call scientific ufology. So it's a little more rigorous, you might say, at least they try. There's a Steve Bassett's X conference every year, which, by the way, I would encourage all of you to look into attending. It's going to be in Washington, D.C. at the National Press Club in May. Go online, and just while I'm thinking here, this is a bit of a sidetrack, but there are DVDs of prior X-Conference lectures that are available online. I suggest you go to Steve Bassett's website. Google it. Just Google it. You'll find it, okay? Anyway, I'm talking about... What's that, Stephen? I heard you. I thought I heard Stephen Bassett. Never mind. Lost your chance. There's the X-Conference, which is more of a politically oriented thing. And there are a number of other conferences out there, but then there's this one. This is like, it's a week-long love fest for people who are interested in this topic and all related topics. It's not just UFOs, although that's in there. It's about all the crazy stuff, man, that's in our field. Crop circles, dimensions, angelic beings. I don't study all of those things, at least not in detail, but they're all interesting. And here's the thing that I feel is valuable about it, which is that in my 15, 16 years now that I've been studying this topic, many of you much longer, I know, that this field is vastly more challenging, vastly more interesting than I had thought when I first got into it, back in olden times, otherwise known as the 1990s, when I thought, well, there apparently are these craft mechanically driven by, like in the 1950s, day the Earth stood still, men from another planet, coming. Well, it's a little more complicated than that, I think. In fact, that's a lot of what I'll be talking about today. And so it's at the Laughlin Conference, this International UFO Congress, which has run for just about 2 decades, where a lot of those idea-stretching, mind-expanding ideas come in. I wouldn't say all of them are right, but so what? That's what it's all about. We're trying to learn something new. And when you're doing that, you'll have some true things that are almost exactly true and other things that are maybe a bit off. And this is where the ideas get explored and passed around and where you meet some interesting people. So again, it's the end of that era, but I'm sure that there'll be many good days ahead for the conference in its new incarnation. I certainly wish it the best. Maybe they'll have me speak there. Hints, hints. So, that was a bit shameless, wasn't it? Now, I just wanted to mention one or two other things before I head on to my main quarry for today. You know that I write books on the UFO topic. Some of you know that I publish books. I'm my own small-time publisher. I really enjoy that, actually. And now I've expanded, moved into publishing the books of other people. I've actually been talking with Grant Cameron and T. Scott Crane, who 20 years ago published a really neat book that didn't get a lot of distribution at the time. It was published by MUFON, called MJ12, UFOs, MJ12, and the Government. I'm republishing that book with them, which is kind of neat, under Keyhole Publishing, my company. I've just published a book by my very good friend and colleague, Dr. Richard Sauder. This is a great book. It's called Hidden in Plain Sight, Beyond the X-Files. Richard Sauder, in my view, is, I think, well, not just my view, I think is clearly the world's leading public expert on the phenomenon of underground bases, underground tunnels, undersea bases. And if you think that's crazy, I suggest you browse through his book. I have it here at my table. I edited that book, and I wrote the foreword, and I read through it 3 or 4 times. The thing about it that you'll come away with, it's one of those books that will not leave your consciousness even long after you're done with it. It's one of those books that's going to stay with you. And the reason is that it presents a radically different version of what our reality is, or what our reality appears to be. And it's presented with a great deal of plausibility. For instance, if you really wonder, well, how is it possible to have a base under the ocean seafloor? That's impossible. Well, he shows you how it isn't impossible. What he really does is to take three things and work them together. He goes through plans by the U.S. military and the Navy in particular to build substantial under-the-ground facilities. And these are plans that go back to the 1960s, and he's got them reproduced. They're very clear, very easy to see. And he talks about the technology to build massive underground bases, and if you think it's impossible, well, you won't after you're done reading. And then he talks about the many leaks that have come to him over the years. And leaked information is, well, leaked information. It's not always confirmable every time. But when you get a lot of it, you have to wonder. And what Richard did in this book, I think, is really beautifully put together with high level of plausibility, the argument that there is a possibly labyrinthian level of underground activity, deep, 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 deep below. So that's called Hidden in Plain Sight. I would strongly encourage you to take a look at it. As I mentioned, I have many copies here, and they are available. I think that's about all I'm going to mention. There's a few other things I was going to get into. I am possibly working on a television show. I guess I can mention that. I'm working on a television show, and we possibly have a commitment. I guess that's how I would want to put it. And this is a show called First Contact. I'm a fan of First Contact. I think we got a neat show. It's produced by a gentleman named John Doria out of Philadelphia, and we've put together a team. And I say we because I would say that I work closely with John on this. One of the other team members is someone known to UFO conferences, Rob Simone. And there are a couple of other people involved who are just wonderful to work with. And we are shopping this show around. We do have network interest, and we are hoping that we're going to have a green light. And if and when that happens, you'll hear more about it from my website at keyholepublishing.com. Okay, so enough of that. I'm sure there's something else I was going to mention, but, well, I'm sorry, I'm reaching into my notes here for one thing. Excuse me. Okay. So the title of what I decided for today was called Looking Back, Looking Forward Toward a New Understanding of Exopolitics. It's kind of mistitled after I thought about it, because there's not a lot of looking back in what I have to say to you tonight, but that's okay. What is exopolitics? It's one of these phrases, concepts, words that it's had a lot of cachet in the last decade. I think it's a great word. It relates to the relationship that we humans are having with whatever the intelligences there are that are behind the UFO phenomenon. If that means they're extraterrestrial, then that would be our relationship with these extraterrestrials. That's exopolitics. Fabulous. Now, for a lot of the time that I've been in the field here, I've avoided dealing with this. I've often felt that it's sort of a premature concept. How are we to talk about our relationship with them when we don't even have an open official acknowledgement that they're even here? How can we have a political dealings with them without really having any knowledge of what they are about, what their agendas are, and so forth? And so I really held off for a long time. I had been invited at one point to join the Exopolitics Institute and politely declined. I didn't want to get involved with other organizations anyway. But I just felt it was not really for me. But the thing is, when you write about UFO history, and then when you write about politics the way that I always do, I can't help myself, it just keeps coming back. And so what I decided, though, is that after I was acquainted with a lot of the exopolitical literature, is that I wasn't particularly happy with a lot of it. Not all of it. I think some of it's very, very cogent. But there's a certain portion of it that has always bothered me. And I'm going to be talking to you about that. And what I'm going to try to do in this talk is to map out a different path a different place for exopolitics, a different way to understand it, maybe. Or maybe, let's say, a compatible way with some of the other directions that have been discussed, but something that hones it and might be productive. That's my goal. So, if we're going to do exopolitics, then we have to look at a couple of different components, right? We have to understand who we are. We need to understand who we are. And then we need to understand who they are. Now, the problem with that, first of all, understanding who we are. Well, we can't ever agree on who we are. That's why we have political parties. That's why people fight with each other. So we have a hard time doing that as it is. And then understanding who they are, well, that's even harder, obviously. How do we find out about their politics, their sociology, their psychology, their motives, their intentions? We're always at a handicap when we do this. And so the first thing that I would say about any exopolitics is that it's going to be filled with gaping holes. And there's nothing that we can do about that until we get more information. And that might be difficult to do. That's a frustration, but that's life. Okay? So, let me move into a little bit of my take on our side of the equation. That's a little easier to do. I'm often fond of talking about the differences between official reality and unofficial reality. Now, long before I did UFOs as a topic, I was a student of, among other things, Soviet history. I distinctly recall my years studying the regime of Joseph Stalin. Fun times. Not. One of the things about Stalin is the famous Soviet census of 1939. And the story behind this was that Stalin had actually ordered a census of the Soviet Union for 1937. It was done. It was taken. The only problem with that census is that it showed a population deficit of about, I think, 15 million people who should have been there in the country but weren't there because guess what? They were all dead. So Stalin didn't like those numbers. He had all of the census takers shot. The few who weren't were sent to the Gulag. This is true. 2 years later, a new Soviet census came out with the correct total of the population. 170 million instead of 156 million. Gee, isn't that great? That became the official number, the official reality. And in fact, in subsequent books on the Soviet Union published here in the West, that 170 million was given as the official correct total. It was only years after Glasnost that people began to dispute it. What's my point here? Well, in that type of a society, it's easy to see. When you have a heavy-handed, ham-fisted totalitarian regime, yes, you have official truth, and then you have actual truth. But what we all learn, I think, is that this is a type of thing that happens wherever you go. And the reason is that because in all societies, there are those who are in control, who run the show, and those who don't. And those who run the show are always going to promote a particular version of reality that is amenable to what they want, obviously. So that's a long-winded description on our official culture. What are the major global issues in our official reality? Well, right, we just have been reading, some of you, if you're into finance, in Davos in Switzerland. Every year they have the World Economic Forum, and this year they trot out the same types of bland phrases that they want to talk about: economic and social welfare. Now, so after the great crash, mitigating global risks and systemic failures. I think we can figure out a little bit what that means. Enhancing sustainability. That's a big theme that they've talked about this year. And security, i.e., terrorism and I suppose North Korea and whatever. And then something I don't know what they mean by this. Creating a values framework. You tell me. That's fun. Vague. The main things they've been talking about is the euro with Hungary, the Greek crisis, which I think has probably dominated everything, There's discussion on taxing banks, all conventional stuff. I'm not saying this isn't important, okay? But there are things that we're missing from Davos, okay? Systemic financial corruption, money laundering, drug trafficking, by any yardstick, okay? Drug trafficking is one of the top industries in the world. Now, the numbers vary wildly. We're never going to really know, for obvious reasons, how much, what is the total value of the international drug trafficking trade. But it's competitive with oil, and that's no joke. It's probably less than oil. But to even compare it, you get the idea. The simple fact that that business is illegal doesn't mean that nobody wants that money. Everybody wants that money. Whether you're a street corner pusher or a cop on the take or the Chase Bank of New York or the CIA or the Pakistani ISI or any agency in the world. Because if you need to raise secret armies, overthrow governments, assassinate people with impunity, subvert elections, then you need a lot of cash. And what you really need is cash that's not traceable easily, that you don't have to explain. So the money laundering is an absolutely crucial element of our economy in the world today. And it never gets discussed. Securities fraud I mentioned here. This was introduced to me by the great Catherine Austin Fitts, former Assistant Secretary of Housing and Urban Development under George Bush Sr., who is a great writer, great lady, and has a website, and she writes a lot about these topics. So it's hard to know, but they're important, and they're not discussed, at least not the way they need to be. Also not discussed at Davos are the black budget economies. Now, black budgets. This is another area where there's a lot of uncertainty as to how much money we're talking about. If you talk about, by the way, look at this really neat badge. I don't know if you can see that or read it. This is one of the many covert secret black budget badges that U.S. military forces have to identify their group, their unit. This one says a lifetime of silence behind the green door. In the center of that, if you can see it, is a green alien with red eyes. And there's a little red star over over Texas on that map there. Maybe, you know, Fort Hood, I wonder actually. Fort Hood's got some stuff going on under the ground. In fact, Richard's book talks a little bit about that, Richard Souter's book. So regarding the black budget, how much is it? We don't really know. The New York Times estimated the black budget in 2008 to be $32 billion. Wired magazine for 2009 estimated that it was about $50 billion, which is a lot of money, by the way. I could enjoy $50 billion. I bet you could. A lot of nations don't have that much money to spend, period, for all of their things. And this is our black budget. In other words, this is the secret component to the U.S. military budget. That's all that is. And that's enormous, of course. But really, is the black budget more than this? Now, many of us who follow this, and we talk about such topics as missing money from the U.S. Treasury and the U.S. Defense Department, come across phrases of trillions of dollars, not billions. Now, maybe it doesn't seem like a big difference, but a trillion is 1,000 times more than a billion. So it's a lot of money. And through the 1990s and into our own decade and century, every now and then there are these articles that talk about trillions of dollars that are not being accounted for. This one here is a reference to the famous statement by Donald Rumsfeld in 2001, in which he was speaking to the House Armed Services Committee in July of 2001, shortly before 9/11. And this is, of course, when the Bush team was brand new. So it wasn't really a political issue for them to announce that they inherited this massive fiscal snarled situation from the previous administration. And Rumsfeld told Congress that he says, as crazy as it sounds, according to our accounting records, we cannot account for $2.6 trillion in transactions, if you can believe it. And then that was later amended to 2.3 trillion. So it wasn't a misspoken statement there. I tried wrapping my head around this for the longest time. Here's one regarding 3.3 trillion from the Treasury. And in fact, that was an analysis by Catherine Fitz. Where does all this money come from? I mean, the Pentagon's official budget in 2001, the year that Rumsfeld made that statement, was about $310 billion, so about 1/8 the amount he's talking. How do you lose 8 times your money? Well, turns out, I don't really believe that all of that money, that trillions of dollars, have just gone missing. I tried to figure this out. I want to be responsible here. I don't think it helps us to just throw these numbers around without trying to understand what we're talking about. And this is not to say that a lot of money hasn't been stolen, because it has. Within the Defense Department, particularly during the 90s, there were literally hundreds of accounting systems, software, logistics systems that did not talk to each other. When you go through reconciliation, the numbers can get very screwy. I'm not an accountant, but I'm sure some of you who are accountants might understand this better than I do. Many of those missing expenditures are often reconciled later. And in fact, regarding the 2.3 trillion that Rumsfeld spoke about, I did read, and I don't know that this is true, but I did read that some months after that, much of that money was reconciled. In fact, most of it was, but still a couple of $100 billion was not reconciled. So that doesn't mean that even that was stolen, although it could have been. Certainly, the point is that many billions of dollars go missing and have gone missing. And the fact is that you don't need to have lost trillions of dollars to have a massive black budget world with an enormous amount of funding behind it. And that is, in fact, I think what has happened. Back to our official reality that's missing certain things. Well, one thing is missing is this, UFOs. It's missing what we can call black world technologies. I'm going to be talking a little bit more about that in just a moment, and radical sources of energy. Ultimately, let's get right down to it here. The most important things going on in our world today are off limits in the official versions of our reality. The most important things. The fact that we have a financial system that is, I mean, do you remember the BCCI scandal of about 20 years ago? A perfect case in point. BCCI was a CIA-operated bank that laundered billions and billions of dollars, finally got caught. You go to the Wikipedia entry on BCCI today, and it'll say, oh yeah, and the CIA was also a customer of BCCI. I'm like, well, no, it was a little more than a customer. It was run by them. It's a complete whitewash. These important things don't get discussed publicly. The UFO reality. Whatever these things are, whether we're making them or not, here's one thing you can take to the bank. They're operating on some principle of energy that's a little bit better than gasoline. If they can stop silently, hover over you for however long they want, and then take off like a bullet, they're obviously using something that we would like to know about. Just before I went on, a gentleman asked me what I thought about the recent UFO or phenomenon that was seen over Norway, that spiral. Remember, that's on, many of you have seen this video. It's quite fascinating, and I don't really know what is behind that yet. I'm looking into it like you are probably. But here's one thing. The mainstream media has dropped that story. Now, whatever that thing is, all right, is pretty darn interesting. Whether it's a military test of some sort or not, one would think this is worth looking into. This is worth asking, what is the science behind that? What could that be? And yet it's dropped off the table. And so it does with all of the important things. So let me talk a little bit about what I think our true reality does incorporate, what it does have. Well, it's got, one thing is it's got some kind of conflict with these UFOs. Now, I'm not saying who are the good guys and who are the bad guys here. I don't always know. But I do know that 60 years of documents prove to me, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that our jets are chasing them every year. And not just American jets, Russian jets, European jets, African jets, Chinese jets, Australian jets. Wherever you want to go, there are encounters. South American jets, Peruvian, Chilean, Argentine. They go after these things. And they cannot compete. So whatever is happening, there is some kind of trouble in paradise. And that's important, it seems to me, particularly when we are talking about exopolitics. Another thing about our world is, well, this is pretty obvious, I guess, ownership by the few of the many. We have a world in which wealth is never equally distributed, and I'm not saying that it should be. I'm not making a judgment on this. But let us pretend that this entire room is the United States. So there's, I don't know, 600 people here or so. And let's say all of the money in this room equal the total wealth of the room. So let's say there's $600, $1 for each person, if this were a Marxist utopia. And then we could sing songs and have fun. But of course, in our little room, one person would own, maybe 100 of those dollars, roughly. And then the next person after that one might own another 50. Maybe the top 6 or the top 10 would own possibly half of all the actual wealth, and then the rest of the people would have to share, what remains. And so that's our world. And I'm not saying that I'm here to level things, but this is a room now that has a political system. It's got an economy. It's got institutions that make it go. So all you really have to do is ask, well, who's going to be in the best position to manipulate those institutions for his own benefit? Well, I think the question answers itself. And that's our world, of course. And so another feature of that world is preponderant control by those very few people at the top over the media, over the academic world, over the political world. When in this country every 4 years you have these elections where you have to enlist the support of the great unwashed, as few as possible, thank you very much, but you got to do it. What are the issues that you have them discuss? Certainly not who owns what. Have them talk about religion, that's always good. Issues that can never be resolved. Platitudes that mean nothing. Is this by accident? I don't think so. Another element of our reality is compartmentation. Getting into the world of intelligence, the military world. It's a world of secrets. I was reading in a very, very good book called Blank Spots on the Map by a fellow named Trevor Paget, I believe. I have it in my room. He comments that it looks like roughly more than 50% of all of the U.S. government documents ever created are classified. Okay. More than half of all of the government documents of the United States are classified, which means if you are a historian seeking to put the history of your government down for posterity, most of your history is being held secret from you. Going beyond that into the world of compartmentation, it gets even more screwy than that. You could have two friends at CIA working in adjoining rooms for years and years. They could attend their daughter's weddings and go to parties together, but they would not have a clue of what the other one does. And that's what compartmentation is about. That's obviously logical for keeping secrets. But it makes it difficult when, if you believe in an open society, how to get information out that maybe the public does have a right to know about. Another thing that I do want to talk about here is a concept that I've been developing, and I explore this a lot in my recent book. I call it a breakaway civilization. I think that this is a part of our world. Now, let me try to explain it. Throughout human history, there have always been simultaneous multiple civilizations that have existed. If you go back 500 years, you can see distinctive civilizations in different parts of the world. In Europe, in China, in Africa, in the Near East, all of these regions, in South America. They all had a different worldview. They had different understandings of what we would call science, what makes the world work. They didn't share information because mainly they couldn't. And they're considered separate civilizations. Okay. And this, you can go as far back as you want in human history, and that's been the case. Now, the great trend, of course, of the last 500 years of our own history is the merging and blending of these civilizations. Increasingly, it's not just a 20th, 21st century thing. International trade goes back many centuries, and it always worked to, knit the civilizations together. But even during something as recent as the Cold War, I think we could definitely argue that we're talking to some extent about separate civilizations. Certainly, Eastern and Western scientists would not share a lot of their critical information with each other, highly competitive. Soviet science, in fact, for a number of years was weighed down by its own Marxist ideology and concepts that were certainly not shared by Western science. So even within the lifetimes of probably everyone here, we have examples of separate scientific infrastructures that don't share information with each other. Maybe with a few different ideas along the way. So now what happens when you have what we can call the black world, the classified world? And let's pretend that 60 some odd years ago, exotic alien technology was recovered by us, by one of the militaries of the world, the US. So they've got this, right? Now you've got to study it, and studying it costs money, so you've got to fund it. You can't tell Congress about it, so you've got to create a black budget, covert methods, convoluted ways of doing this. You create a system that's off the grid, okay? And you have infinite amount of money to play with for all intents and purposes, and you got total secrecy. So isn't it possible that at some point some team of genius scientists has a couple of eureka moments where they can reproduce this high tensile fabric or reproduce to some extent certain electromagnetic properties of this material or create something along the lines of superconductivity, or you get the idea. Now, the thing about science, of course, is that it builds on itself. And let's say some of these breakthroughs might not be shared with the rest of us for reasons of security. They might not even be shared fully with the official military establishment, even though that might come in handy in fighting wars. Why wouldn't it be shared? I'll give you an example. In 1986, when the United States bombed Libya, now, in 1986, we had F-117A. We had a stealth fighter in operation. The only problem is that its existence was classified. And it was elected not to use the stealth fighter in the raid on Libya because using it would have revealed its existence, or would have possibly revealed its existence. And so, even though it was the top fighter in the U.S. arsenal at the time, perversely, in a way, it was held back from this strike, and F-111s were used instead. It's kind of weird, but that's how it is. Your best technology doesn't get used for every single thing. And if you've got now a breakthrough, let's say we've figured out how to reproduce flying saucers in some way, we can do it. Well, they're not necessarily going to be used in all of your geopolitical struggles. Maybe because they're being used for something more important. And so what you have is a society that develops separately from the rest of us. What is a civilization? Well, I don't know. It's got a certain level of technology, it's got certain core beliefs, it's got a certain Weltanschauung, a certain worldview about what is the nature of reality. If those things are all different in this classified world than what the rest of us have, could we not call it a separate civilization? I think we can. And that's why I call it a breakaway civilization. Now, I don't know how far they've gone with their technology. I can take some guesses. But I believe that this is very likely the nature of the game today. That they are possibly, and by they I mean classified world, so far ahead now that they may not even know how to bring us up to speed. I spoke with a scientist once who told me about NSA computers in the 1960s, mid-60s. He said they had computers running at a clock speed of about 650 megahertz in 1965. That may not sound like a big deal to us today in 2010, but that clock speed wasn't attained by the commercial market until around the year 2000, 35 years later. And you know, I remember when I saw the movie Apollo 13, those guys are stuck out in space, and there are people down on the ground using slide rules to get them home. I'm thinking, gosh, it might have been nice to have some computers there. You said, well, yeah, it would have been, but NSA couldn't give them up. So that's just one example. That's 35 years ahead. But I really think we may be talking about something vastly more substantial, in particular, if that classified world is dealing on a daily basis with the ET reality, as I suspect they are, in which case they've got a really different worldview than the rest of us. Now, I talk to a lot of people about this topic, and not everyone cares. Honestly, not everyone cares. People have jobs, they have kids, they got responsibilities. I understand. I truly do. There's a lot of important things in this world that I am not really diving into because I don't have time. I have so many hours in a day. But I'm submitting to you that UFOs do matter. They matter a lot. They matter to every single person on this planet, if for no other reason than that they represent technologies that are not supposed to exist, but yet here they are. We're in a world that's got a lot of infrastructure problems right now. We're teetering about a lot of things. Periodically it's oil, water, natural resources, cascading, possibly ecosystem failures. Who knows? We got some problems. There may be some answers within the UFO technology field. I think that most of us can agree that that is very likely the case. And that UFOs also matter for those of us who might be considered idealists, I include myself here, who believe in such quaint anachronisms as truth and sovereignty and rule by the people. It matters when silence on this all-important topic occurs because it damages our society as an open society, which even though we're not really in as open a society as we want, it could be worse, but it could be a lot better. And this is damaging to us. But really, it matters because this topic, you see, affects people personally. And it's very easy for researchers, myself included, to forget this. There are a lot of people in this world who have been affected by this phenomenon, by what appear to be beings, entities. Not all of them are good, all right? There are a lot of people living with some form of generalized anxiety, fear, panic. I'm sure some of you are. And I know many other people who are. And they are living in that reality because something is going on in their life. Something is affecting them. They don't understand what it is. They can't talk to anyone about it. They get ridiculed if they do. They're isolated. They're messed up. And we as a society basically just toss them to the curb. There's something very, very profoundly wrong about that. It's a serious problem. What we have to do, it's my responsibility and it's your responsibility, if you understand that this is going on, to try to help someone who may be experiencing that. That doesn't mean that we can be their therapist. I'm not a qualified therapist, but I can listen. We can let people know that they're not alone. That's the most important thing. We may not be able to stop what they're going through, but we can be there for them. So that leads me to ask, well, what is going on? What's going on? Back to exopolitics, I consider this the fundamental question. I write a fundamental, but I think it's probably the bottom line. What's actually happening here? Now, I'll be asking a lot of questions. I don't have every single answer. But my hope is that these questions are going to lead us into a territory that we should be going. I'll tell you what's not helpful. Simple, simplistic answers. To wit, all abductions are actually not alien abductions, but they're done by military covert ops. All right, I've heard this. Dr. Stephen Greer has said this. I just think it's wrong. I've talked with him about it. Not just publicly, privately. Now, he's got his opinion, but I just don't agree. I also think it's irresponsible. All right? I don't think it comports with the facts as I see them. That doesn't mean that there aren't military abductions going on. Oh, they are going on. But I think what we have is a reality that's a little more complex. Or the thesis that all ETs are good or beneficent. Give me a break, please. Or that they're all bad. No, come on. It frustrates me. I will share that part with you. Okay? I get frustrated when I hear these types of, statements by people, and I think, well, how do you know what you know? What's your basis for this? And then we find out that someone either channels information that I can't confirm this, or they have someone who's a remote viewer and remote viewed Mars and told them. Okay, good. Which leads me, well, I'm coming up to my main point here. What we want to do with this, if we're going to have an understanding of exopolitics, we're going to need at some point to resolve what the abduction phenomenon means and what it is. Now, we're still on this path, I think. You've got all kinds of researchers in the field talking about abductions. And they have different angles on it. Not every single abduction researcher says that the ETs are evil and out to get us in some way, but there is a possibility of hybrids being created. Sure there are. It's the possibility that there are agendas happening, that there's manipulation going on with us that we're not aware of. And even if it may be for our own good, I think most of us can agree that if you or I were the subject of an abduction experiment, we might want to have given informed consent before it's the case. Now, some of what has passed for exopolitical analysis, we really have to look at a little more critically. And some of it really has to be rejected. In the last couple of years, there's been kind of a neat development on the internet, the phenomenon of the examiner.com. It's great in a way. It's an awesome idea because it allows you, if you wish, you can try to apply. Some people have been rejected, I'm told. But you could apply and you could be an examiner writer, and you could write about the UFO topic. And the thing about that, like I get UFO news filtered, news stories through my Google News filter. And the Examiner articles are always very highly ranked. It's really amazing. They beat out some of the mainstream newspapers out there. They've done very, very well in that regard. So it's. Is someone calling me here? I'm hearing something. This better not be psychological warfare. I'm really going to be pissed if it is. I got stuff to talk about here. So that's the Examiner, and there's a lot of people who contribute to the Examiner regarding exopolitics. Okay. You want to hear some of the themes that have been discussed in the Examiner articles? One is the proven existence of reptiles on Mars, reptilians on Mars. Another is a statement that the HARP project destroyed Haiti. Another is that the scientist Hal Puthoff is running a Mars colony. Now, okay. Where do I begin here? Where does one begin? Look, any of these things are on the table if you can back them up with actual sources that a legitimate journalist would employ before writing an article like that. And none of those articles pass that test. Not one. Not even close. They are an embarrassment. Other articles. The whole Obama disclosure buildup throughout 2009. I'm very sorry. I beg to differ that there was this impending disclosure. And I said this multiple times throughout 2009, that I saw no evidence, none, that there was going to be an impending disclosure by the Barack Obama administration in 2009. And yet, we were given sources. Some of them appeared to be psychic sources. Others, these mysterious insiders, no one's ever discussed here, saying it's going to happen. And it never jived with the logic as I saw it anyway. And of course it didn't happen. And then the kicker, though, was that that non-disclosure was then listed in the Examiner as the top news story of 2009, the fact that it didn't happen. So you create a non-existent issue, it doesn't happen, and then that becomes the issue. That's an embarrassment, too. I spoke to Michael Salla about that. And I like Michael. I really do. I think he's a good guy. I also think he said a number of things that I thought are very insightful. But that I had a problem with. And the other articles were by Alfred Weber that I mentioned, and I have a real problem with those. Researchers who are responsible need to stand up. We need to hold certain standards when we talk about these issues. I know as well as they do that we live in a weird, strange place, that the actual reality of our world is vastly more bizarre than this official reality that we have when we walk out into the casino here. But I also know that when we talk about this, we're not just spouting out whatever comes into our head. That's not a responsible way to do this. We have to be responsible. We have to be a little more careful, a lot more careful. The problem is, and I'm not trying to accuse them of what I'm about to suggest here. I understand about writers needing to make money. I am a writer. For 20 years, actually, even before I did UFOs, I've been a writer who makes his living that way. And so I have a tremendous amount of empathy and sympathy for anyone who is able and attempts to make money as a writer. It's not easy to do. All right? And the Examiner articles do pay a certain amount of money per click. My fear is that what has happened is that some people are getting sucked into this need to get as many hits as possible and in doing so become increasingly sensationalistic. And that's where I have the problem, because that affects my field, that affects indirectly my reputation, because I get roped into this. And so I'm here in front of you today to defend that and to say, I'm not going to put up with this anymore. People need to stand up, and I'm one of them. I'm standing up now. So, thank you. I appreciate that. I do. It'll make up for all the shit I catch after I get home. Okay. Moving right along. Let me speculate a little bit or ask some questions on who are they, what they are. I can ask these questions. I can't necessarily answer them. I think they could be one thing, but they could be many things. I suspect they are many things. In other words, I suspect that we are dealing with a lot of different groups that are here right now. And I say this because when I look at the reports of encounters that people have reported with other entities, there are a fairly wide range of several basic types. And I speculate, I think, that we're probably talking about different groups. On top of that, there have been some, yes, leaked information that have come out over the years, including to myself and including to some other researchers whom I happen to trust. That gives me reason to believe that our classified world is very aware of this, of the existence of several groups that are here. And that our classified world is monitoring them in some way. I think that is going on. We can ask, have these entities recently discovered us, or have they known about us for a long time? Are we part of a program of theirs? I have a friend in Rochester, New York, where I live, a lady named Colleen Clements. She's a PhD. She teaches at the University of Rochester, where I studied. And until recently, she also taught as an adjunct professor at the Rochester Institute of Technology until she lost her job because she wrote about UFOs. When you're an adjunct, you don't get job security, of course. She's done some very good work. One thing that she's really focuses on is Central Eurasian culture, Central Asian cultures of 30, 50,000 years ago. She's looked at, as Zachariah Sitchin has looked at in the Near East, Colleen has looked at in Central Asia. And she looks at the ancient myths. And she also is very conversant with contemporary studies in DNA and genetics. She's put together a thesis that makes her believe that the human species has been modified genetically from the outside about 50,000 years ago. That's her argument. I think it might be true. If that's true, what do these others think about us? Well, we're their project. Are we their farm animals? Are we their children? I don't know. These are all possibilities. Which makes me just, again, this is the last hit on contemporary exopolitics I intend to make, but I think when we start talking about things like setting up an ambassadorship program to relate to them, or somehow indicating that they are our spiritual mentors or here to guide us, I'm not saying that this is an impossibility here, but I would suggest that it's very premature to assume that this is how it's going to go down. A couple of things that they might want. I put myself in their position. I do this a lot. I've got nothing else to do with my time. I think, well, what if I were an alien? What would I do? Well, I think one thing they might be interested in is, are the resources here? I mean, look, Earth is a great place. We have an incredible array of minerals, an incredible amount of fresh water, kind of nice. And we've got a stupendously large assortment of unique combinations of DNA, all this life. And we've got humanity. I'll get to that in just a minute. But we've got a lot of things. So like if you know how to play games with DNA, when I'm assuming they do, this is a great place to be. So they might want some resources. They might be interested in creating hybrids. I think that the abduction testimony and evidence points to that as a real possibility, as a real likelihood. Now, are they doing it as a way to remove us, take us over? I don't know. This is, David Jacobs has argued this for quite some time, and maybe he's right, and maybe he's wrong. Are they kind of like voyeurs or joyriding their way through? We don't usually think of that when we think of ETs. We tend to think that they're serious, but we're not all that serious. If we went back in time, let's say 3,000 years, I don't know, we go back to some ancient society of that time with our iPods and our laptops, and we'd have some people who might be responsible, and maybe not others. Maybe there's some who might want to set themselves up as a god. Be easy to do. They would look at us, however, and say, wow, iPods, laptops, you people obviously have solved all of your social and political and economic problems, or you would have blown yourselves up by now. And we would just probably look at each other and not say anything, back away slowly. You know, clearly, the argument that a more technologically advanced culture has solved all of its problems is an utterly specious argument. There's no basis for it. I argued this one-on-one privately with Stephen Greer. We didn't convince each other. He said, and let me give him, you know, his due here. His argument was, well, yeah, that's right, Rich, but they're at a different level. They're even more advanced than us. They would have access to weapons that would allow them to go, psh, you know, vaporize each other, presumably. We, you know, need to get past that. We need to have a different social arrangement if we're going to get to that level. And maybe he's right, but there's a suspicion in me that says it doesn't have to be that way. So, are they here to help us? I think actually that there are some who are here to help. I think that in a way they may be as varied as we are here in our species. So, and you know, if you look at the species on Earth as we have them, the higher up, I mean, the human race is really the only one that is capable of being truly demonic or even angelic. We really have the full range. And it's because of the fact, I think, that we have a very advanced intellect. And so we're able to come up with a greater range of what we can be. And if that's the case with us, may it not also be the case with intelligences that are even beyond ours? Something that could be truly sadistic or something that could be truly angelic. I leave this out as a question. I don't have the answer to this. Is there a spiritual component to this reality that I'm talking about? I will share with you that I have spiritual beliefs. I believe that when this body of mine dies, there will be a part of me that I think continues. Let's call it a soul, fine. I certainly, I don't pretend that I know the exact nature of where I may go, but I think that we do have it. And it's not a faith, it's a belief. I think it's the case. I may be wrong, but I think that there's some reason to believe it, and that's my status at this point. And so if that's so, if that's the case, then I assume they are aware of this. They may have some interest in us on that level. It might be good, it might be something that we like, or it might not. There are both possibilities here. The other thing I sometimes wonder is, do they just live here? Do they have an infrastructure that's substantial? Do they live? As Richard Sauter points out, we have the technology ourselves in our own society to go deep. Presumably they do. They might have a great place down there, right? A couple of 10 miles below the surface. Sure, they might. And maybe they've been here a long time. And maybe it's only in the last 50, 60 years that we've really been bumping into them a lot. And maybe they're thinking, oh, great, the natives have learned about us. Now what do we do? Possibility. There are all kinds of possibilities here. And if we're dealing with them, we need to ask these questions. Where are they? Where do they live? This is a clip from the website of the late Jeff Challenger. I now have Jeff's entire website as part of my own website. Jeff has a number of old friends who are here today. I got to chat, I think, with most of them who are here. Wonderful. The old Sacramento UFO crowd. Great, great group of people. And Jeff Challenger did great work. Just to tell you, he spent really his whole adult life obsessively downloading NASA space videos. And then not just NASA, but the European Space Agency, the Russians and the Chinese toward the end. And he put them on this website, and he went through them looking for anomalies. And he found a lot. And the one thing about Jeff Challenger was that he wasn't this wide-eyed, gullible believer who would just believe anything. He was very analytical, very careful. A number of the things that he put on the site, he offered prosaic explanations for. But there are other things that are like this. This is much speeded up clip from 2005, space mission S-114 in August of 2005. And this is an object that is seen, it actually, I think it's a 2 or 3 minute clip which he condensed. And you can see it doing what appears to be a U-turn and also maneuvering as it goes. I think of this as a very good, very interesting clip indeed. There are a lot of them. They are on my website. It's totally free. You can just go. If you go to my site, keyholepublishing.com, you'll see a link to Jeff Challenger's site. I would encourage you to go visit it. You can spend weeks there. Literally, you can spend weeks and weeks going through what he had. It's enormous, vastly larger than my site. So are they in orbit? Are they underground? This is a drawing from Richard Sauter's new book. Yes, I am shamelessly promoting it. Forgive me. It's a great book, though. This is a drawing from the 1930s, a speculative underground tube shuttle concept. Are they under the sea? This is another image from the same book. This was done by Navy artist Walter Korshner in the 1960s. Mr. Korshner is still alive. He was tasked by the Navy in the 1960s to draw a series of illustrations for them to depict their plans to build undersea bases. This image is one of those. And as you can see, there's under the sea mountain. He gives you this cutaway look. There are a bunch of submarines that have docked under a sea mountain. And there's places where you can get out and walk around and do things. Now, Korshner emphasized that he did not know if such plans were acted on. Of course, you wouldn't in a compartmented world like that. But he was tasked with describing them. Or are they among us? Well, again, if I were an alien, I would certainly want to breed my own group of humans. I'd want them working for me. I would be interested in humanity. I'd be thinking, these people are about to jump into my world. In the last 100 years, they have made astonishing progress in what they do. I want to make sure that I've got my people working that society. And certainly there are a number of cases in the UFO literature that describe beings that look totally human, but that seem very odd. Now, look, I have odd friends, and I'm sure you do too. But then we're talking really odd. If you read a recent one of the recent books by Bud Hopkins called Sight Unseen. The entire second half of that book is about encounters with human-looking beings that somehow don't seem human. It's very interesting reading. So I guess all the foregoing is meant in order to open things up a little bit and to offer a number of scenarios that are happening now in this crazy reality of ours. How do we move forward and disclose the truth? And what happens when we do? What happens when we do then? Our species, our civilization, let us say, is at a crossroads right now. In the last generation, we've developed a global connectivity that really there's just no parallel to it. We've experienced what I call a transnational revolution, in which individual sovereignty of nations has increasingly become irrelevant. There hasn't been any law that just says, okay, no more nations now, but what's happened in practice is that is what's happened. I mentioned in the beginning the Davos conference, and that's just one of many international events that take place that really show we've moved into a different world here, a transnational global world. And I'm not even saying that's all bad. It's probably necessary in a lot of ways. If you want to be able to do internet, you want to make cell phone calls, if you want to have this connectivity, well, things are going to have to change. Okay? But what I am saying is that the way that this change takes place can be one in which it allows freedom or not. It is very possible that we can move into a global police state, and we all see the signs on the wall. It's also a fact that the internet is still a bastion of freedom in this world, in many places of the internet. You have places like China where they restrict it. There are other nations, Western nations, where there are periodically attempts to restrict internet in one way or another, so we have to be careful. In practice, most people get their news from their AOL news server or their MSNBC or Yahoo, God forbid. Well, that's good for American Idol news, so you can get that. In other words, they get it from some major pre-masticated, pre-chewed corporate sponsor that says, here's your news, okay, making it no better than the stuff they see on television. However, there are areas of freedom on the internet, many of them, and that's a good thing. And so what we have right now is a kind of clash. It's a big one. It's the monumental clash of the forces of freedom and the forces of control. And we're experiencing in our lifetimes on a scale that I don't think has ever happened before. That fight is not over. We're in it. We're also experiencing, well, possible ends of our infrastructure. Ask yourself, how much longer can this petroleum-based, hydrocarbon-based society go? How many more years? 10 years, 20 years, 50 years? That's pushing it. Okay? I mean, it can happen. One point of history I would like to bring up is that the end of oil has been predicted since the 1920s. Actually, it was the first time. And then, of course, you get new discoveries and so on, and that puts all those arguments in the shade. However, we're in fact is now, oil consumption is not what it was 50 years ago. It doubles roughly every generation globally. My argument for years is, I don't care how much is in the ground. At a certain point, if you keep doubling consumption every 20 years, you're not going to have enough to meet demand. You just won't. Unless it's infinite, and I don't think it is. So we're on an infrastructure that is finite. At a certain point, it's going to be done. And make no mistake, our entire global economy is based on petroleum. The entire global financial system is based on petroleum. 9/10 of the cost of any product you hold up in your hand is dependent on the amount of energy that went into making it, and that's typically petroleum. Our whole world is based on it. And it can't go like that forever. So as I've hinted or stated earlier, there are possible solutions in the technology of what we would call UFOs. There are also definite challenges in applying that technology. Can anybody tell me how much time I have left? I actually don't. No, let me take a look here. Well, I have 45 minutes left? That's good, actually. I think I'm going to be on time. You know why? I am terrible about keeping on time with my lectures. I always go over. And today I prepared for a 90-minute lecture, and then I find out I got 2 hours. So I thought, sweet. So to move forward, what do we need to do? I'm actually going to give this statement. This is a bit presumptuous of me, but here it goes. I'm giving this statement to President Barack Obama. I really believe he needs to hear this. And if not him, then his successor, whoever that might be. Because what this world really needs is the leadership and courage to see what this problem is, and then to take the proper steps to move us into our true destiny, not a destiny that's been denied to us for 60 years. There have been actually very understandable reasons why there has been secrecy on this topic. And let me mention a couple of them real quickly here. You go back to 1947, 1948, and you're the president of this country, the United States, and you're given this awesome information that there are, not only are there other entities that appear to be here, but now we've actually acquired some of their technology. You know, Harry Truman might have had an instinct to tell the world. I think that's possible. And then he might have thought a little bit about it and thought, well, there is a possibility of public panic. That's real. Bear in mind the War of the Worlds panic inspired by Orson Welles was in everyone's memory at that time. Moreover, this exotic technology, I'm not sure if we really want to share it with everyone else, and it's going to be hard not to share it if we tell them that we've got it. And so you might just want to gather your best team together to study it. And now you've got a secret, and as everyone knows, secrets have this way of trying to maintain themselves, especially when a secret can generate profit and power, as this one does. And then, despite your best intentions for illuminating the public, you may think twice, and then thrice, and then it doesn't happen. The problem is, though, that this isn't 1950 anymore. In 1950, you could say, well, the technology is great, but look, we got all the oil we're going to need forever. We've got great stuff that we're doing right now. We don't need that exotic technology. Well, this isn't 1950. And we're taking that oil down at a very rapid rate, and at some point, as I've suggested, we're going to have a hard time meeting demand. We may be at that point now. And if we're not now, we're going to be. So it's a bit of a more dire situation today, I think. So what do we need? I would suggest we need a reasoned humanitarian response by responsible leaders to bring about a peaceful transition and a courageous confrontation of the truth. Let me call that my policy statement. And I think that would be a good one for any president of the United States to start with. The devil is in the details. What are some of the details of what I think the president should do? The first thing I think that a president has to do is reclaim full constitutional authority in the name of the people of the United States. Bear in mind, these are policy statements, and they're not going to be easy to do, but this is what has to be done. We're in a situation where the classified world, the black budget world, I have argued elsewhere and at other times, has gone private, so to speak. That there are private international entities that have essentially, no, not essentially, have completely taken over control of vast areas of what we will call the black budget world. I've spoken with Navy officers, U.S. Army officers, who have said to me, the dominant players in the world of special access programs, that is black budget, are not Defense Department personnel, they're contractors. They're the people in Lockheed and Boeing and General Electric who run these black budget programs. And these, of course, are for-profit enterprises that are owned by those elite people that I told you about earlier. The president's got to reclaim constitutional authority. And one other thing along these lines, let me say. I spoke to another gentleman, a retired high-level officer from the Air Force, some time ago, and this gentleman conducted an interview at one point of a man on his deathbed, a man who was dying in a secure hospital. The man was, I was told, had handled wreckage at Roswell in 1947, including bodies. He ended up living a long life, and now, many years later, here he is dying in a hospital bed. This officer, this Air Force officer, interviewed him, accompanied by security personnel. At one point, said to this man, "It's a shame that people such as yourself are unable to speak the truth about what you know. Wouldn't it be great if there were a presidential executive order that would liberate you from your oath?" To which this man said, "It would take a hell of a lot more than a presidential executive order to liberate me from my oath." I asked my informant, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about some kind of international group, something like the Bilderberger Group, for example? He said, yeah, something like that, I think. Everyone's got their limits as to what they know. The president's got to reclaim it in our name. That's step one. Step two, along these same lines, enforce authority over runaway black budget operations. Step three, release individuals from black world ET-related secrets. Now, if a presidential executive order is not sufficient, in this gentleman's case, then a way has to be found. The president's got to find a way. Establish open international collaboration on a full array of political, social, economic, cultural, religious issues to deal with this. Open up the conversation. Paying special attention to the problems of transitioning human society away from our petroleum-based global economy. Now, here's something I want to be very clear what I mean here. I'm the last person to advocate the New World Order. I don't. I'm an opponent of the New World Order. I can say that very confidently. What has to be done, however, is a federalized global system, but one that is not under corporate domination, with a global Bill of Rights. Look, this is what happened with the United States Constitution 2 centuries ago. That is the story of the American Republic. In 1787, leaders of the American government, as it was then, got together to create a new constitution. There were a lot of arguments over this. The early 13 states had just fought for their independence from Great Britain. Many of them were not interested in giving up that sovereignty to essentially what would be like a new king here in America, a new centralized government. They said, the hell with that. They were the anti-federalists. Their concern was human liberty, and we respect that. There are others who said, well, okay, fine, but the problem is we got 13 states, we got 13 currencies, we got craziness here. There's no cooperation. We have to have some. It's not going to work. We're going to be weak and divided, and we're not going to survive. And so the compromise, the American Constitution, which created a federalized structure, which gave power to the federal government and power to state governments, created a Bill of Rights. Great solution, I think. I think it's a great solution. The fact that we've developed real problems with the American government in the last number of decades doesn't take away from the fact that that solution was political genius and a real gift to mankind, I would add. We need something like that on a grander scale now. We have moved on to a new level. We have to recognize this. We need also to encourage a different kind of global culture. And I don't know how to do this. I've worked for myself for 20 years. I believe in free enterprise. I don't like when governments tell me what I'm supposed to think. What I would like to see in this field, however, in this world, is somehow a way to encourage a global culture that facilitates a way to meet the ET challenge. And by that, I mean, think of it this way. What constitutes American culture today? Well, a lot of it is turning on your television and sitting in your chair and watching, I don't know, whatever you watch. I'm sure what you watch is vastly better than what your neighbor watches. I will say that. Those neighbors, especially my neighbors, they won't be seeing this ever, so it doesn't really matter what I say, I can assure you. But ask yourself, really, how well our educational system has prepared us to meet the challenge of an extraterrestrial race, how well our national media has prepared us, how well our political institutions have prepared us, when we spend most of our times debating who's the best performer on American Idol, or arguing which is the best football team, or who's going to win what Olympic event. These are fun and games, but most people spend most of their day filling their head with stuff that's really not getting them to the level that they need to be. Because if there is the presence of these others here, as I believe that it is, and I think as many of you believe, then we've got some work here if we're going to deal with them in any exopolitical way. And this is the part where when people start talking about raising consciousness levels, I am there. I understand and I agree. We have to. And step one, I would suggest, is in raising our awareness of the world around us in which we live. Observing carefully, stepping back and seeing things for what they are. That's not always easy to do, but at least we start with the awareness of where we are. In short, the United States president needs to take the initiative in promoting what will end up being a radical transformation of our civilization. We are not ready right now as a civilization to deal with them, and we're going to need to be. My suspicion is that it will happen as a great shock. And there'll be a lot of screaming and pulling hair and running around in circles, and then people will calm down. And some people will develop and deal with it, and others won't ever. They just won't. But their children will, and their grandchildren will. That is my own opinion about how most change takes place. I think most people, more or less, wrap it up in their 30s or 40s. That is, they think that they've figured it all out, and then they spend the rest of their life filling in the blanks of what they think they know. Not everyone. We can all be exceptions to that rule, but by and large. But changes across generations will take place. Now, is disclosure possible? Well, I think it is. Some people don't. Some people think it's impossible. I've often said it's impossible and inevitable. A nice little paradox. It is impossible in a way when you think about it. There's really no motivation that I see, no easy motivation for those who have this secret to give it up. You'll see why in a moment. Because if you have disclosure, if the president were to start this process tonight and to say to you, my fellow Americans and indeed citizens of the world, I have been briefed by responsible members of my intelligence community who have informed me that indeed the UFO phenomenon is in part extraterrestrial or alien. Okay? Once you open that door, you can't just walk away. There are going to be many questions, and some of them are going to be very angry questions. One element of disclosure is going to have to address the issue that I raised near the beginning of this lecture, which is that there's an element of confrontation here. So someone's going to ask, Mr. President, why does it appear that our jets are chasing these things? What were they chasing over Stevensville, Texas in 2008? An object which, by the way, was tracked on the FAA, last headed, and I'm not kidding you here, in the direction of the Crawford Ranch in Texas, where President Bush was staying at that time. This is true. Means something. I'd like to know. I think many people would. Why were jets chasing an object right outside Washington, D.C. airspace in 2002? Multiple objects, it turns out. I spoke to a witness who I believe was now the first witness of that, a retired police officer, very good man, who was doing night watchman duty and saw what he believes were 4 F-16s chasing no less than 2 distinct UFO objects that outclassed the interceptors. They went away, came back. When they came back, there were only 2 jets chasing 1 object. What is that? Why are F-16? And we got an admission from the Air Force that they did scramble F-16s to chase an unknown, so we know that that happened. Why? There's trouble here, and the president is going to have to confront that issue. The president is going to also have to confront the grossly illegal nature of the secrecy itself. This black budget runaway culture that has developed, and maybe, yes, I think, this breakaway civilization that I've hypothesized about. That could very well come up, if for no other reason than that I'll ask him. And I'd like to know. And other people will ask too, I'm sure. And that's not going to be an easy thing to deal with. Because, let me just back up here, because what it's going to mean is it'll come out that there has been preponderant control by the classified world over the major voices of our society, the academic world, the scientific world, media. That's not going to be fun for us to examine. It's a political nightmare. Then he's going to have to ask or answer what the secret programs that we have are about. Are we making our own flying saucers? Are we going off-world? Certainly a lot of claims that that's the case. I think it's possible, yes. That image you saw from Jeff Challender's site of this object doing what appears to be a U-turn, that's evidence of a secret space program, either ours or theirs, but it's someone's. And if that's their object, then I can guarantee you we will still have our own secret space program to deal with that. Right? So, what are the secret programs about? Who are they, Mr. President? Not fun to deal with, necessarily. Why are they interested in us, sir? Why are they abducting people? And if they're good, then why are we fighting them? And on and on. And then you'll have the inevitable, severe challenges to the structure of power itself. The political world is going to get rocked by this. Political party alignments are going to change instantaneously by this. Industry. What if we discover now with the UFO mystery comes out that they have a much better version of steel than we have? Well, probably they do. So there goes the steel industry. There goes the petroleum industry. There goes our electronics industry. And now, sure, yeah, there'll be other things, I assume, to take their place, but will it fulfill the infrastructure, the financial infrastructure system that has developed? And the answer, I think, is probably no. Certainly not in the short term. You know, we're dealing with stock market fluctuations now that are going crazy. I think it would be far greater at least in the immediate post-disclosure world. There's going to be a lot of fallout. I mentioned financial instability, infrastructure changes, energy changes, disruptions. Will these other beings be introduced to us? They might not. President might make this announcement because they forced his hand in some way, maybe with some major sighting, right? That can't be denied, but that doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to introduce themselves to us even at that point. You're going to have the problem of some people claiming that there are aliens living among us. Sounds like it's out of a movie, but as I suggested earlier, I think it's actually logical that that would be the case. It is definitely something I would wish to do if I were one of them. And so, can you imagine the nightmare that will pose? The abduction debate is going to become very, very high-pitched at that point. Political polarization, I mentioned. Essentially, you know, in the tradition of less developed nations, third world nations, as we used to call them, you would typically get a breakdown in the political alignments between the modernizers and the traditionalists. There are those who would say, well, you know, we've got to be like these Western societies because they have got their act together. And you have those who say, well, no, because we can't do that. That would change what is unique about us. And I can guarantee you that's exactly what will happen in our own society. There will be those who want to embrace the ET reality and will do so, and there'll be many others, certainly at first in particular, who will be fighting it tooth and nail. We have to be prepared for that. There'll be many suspicions of a New World Order ruse. The President makes a statement. I've been reading about this for years. I'm sure many of you have as well. An announcement of an alien presence as a way to impose a global police state. Scare the hell out of people. Really what 9/11 ended up doing, too. And that the idea is that this is what would happen with an ET announcement. Certainly, and indeed, let me say that any president that makes this announcement, we have to be very careful about what is said, because we cannot assume that the disclosure is complete or even truthful. We have to assume spin is going to be involved. If you were president, you would make sure you have correct spin on this disclosure. You would have to. You don't want to make an announcement that's going to throw the world into panic. So you're going to have to be careful. The problem is that you might be so careful that you don't really tell the truth. And so those of us on the receiving end of this announcement are going to have to be careful. We're going to have to analyze carefully. And then the questions of who are they, what's their agenda, the never-ending ones. How will disclosure affect us? I'm going to try now, this is hard to do, to imagine a post-disclosure world. Because all that most of us in this field do is we imagine this utopia. It'll be great. Free energy, green energy. I want green energy. I'm not sure that that's going to solve all of our problems. Energy issue. let me back up here. There are pros and cons to getting free energy. Let me put it to you this way. For about 150 years, roughly, we've had free energy. It's called petroleum. For most of the time in the last 150 years, gas has been cheap, very, very cheap. Almost, you might say, free. Not quite, but close at times. And it's been great. It's allowed us to kind of scurry about all over the world, like little termites, building roads, hacking down rainforests, destroying all kinds of native ecosystems. Human beings with free energy can be a scary thought. Okay, so thank you. Now, I'm sure that you personally can be trusted with free energy. Well, I know that you can, but your neighbors might not be, nor mine. One of the issues is the energy that would heat your home for free, forever, let's say, presumably, conceivably, could be used to make a bomb that would be really bad. Maybe. Without, in other words, the proper safeguards put into place, the release of information like this could be a very dangerous thing. Releasing the science about it could be a very dangerous thing. And so that's a real problem. It's a valid, legitimate problem that those people at the top of our economic and political food chain have to be thinking about. If they're being responsible, and I think some of them probably are trying to be responsible. I don't really think they're all evil. I think a lot of them are evil. But I think that there are good people there. And so, just like all political factions throughout all of history have had those, Caesar and Pompey, they didn't get along. There are always dissensions at the top levels of any elite structure. And I think that there probably are those who want to get this out, but they're thinking, this is not easy. Think about other kinds of instability that could occur, and again, not necessarily bad for us, but they might require us to change our society in very significant ways. We've had a telecommunications revolution in the last 20 years. My 11-year-old daughter taught me how to use my cell phone that I just got 2 weeks ago. I didn't know what soft keys were. Dad, this is a soft key. You have to. Oh, okay, thanks, great. Dad, everyone knows this. Thank you for telling me. So, our world has changed so much, and it's hard for me even to imagine how much further telecommunications, to take one example, will transform itself with presumably the introduction of exotic technology that would allow, what, thought patterns between people to go around the world instantly? Maybe, I don't know. There's a lot of possibilities here. Keep in mind, 20 years ago, that something as mundane as the World Wide Web didn't exist. We had Usenet, if you want to count the internet, I guess, but the web didn't really get going until the early 90s. And that hasn't been a long time to transform our world. Changes to the global financial picture. I talked about how petroleum is the foundation for the modern financial system. And without petroleum as that foundation, I mean, that's great for us in the long term. Again, please don't misunderstand. I think it's great that we need to move away from that. But it will cause, how long? 5 years, 10 years, maybe more? Significant instability in the global financial scene. Are we just going to end the stock market? Is that going to cease to exist? Some of us would like that to be the case, but the fact is that that's an important foundation for our lives, in fact. That's how our economy functions. And so some of these things might get seriously undermined. Changes in biotechnology. What if we get super longevity? You get to live 500 years. Well, again, that's great. and you deserve it. But it would cause problems. It might cause problems, population being one. The need to create a new political structure somehow to meet all of this, I think, is self-evident. What might we learn from these other entities? The possibilities are endless. Do we have anything to worry about from them? Those possibilities are also almost endless. How would this, and again, I'm giving this to you as a thought here. I'm not going to pretend that I can answer this. How would disclosure change our society, our family, our friends? How would it change you? I had a conversation with a very important person in the classified world. This is a person who's actually famous, pretty famous, who told me, I had an extended private meeting on one occasion, and told me that it was factually known to him that at very deeply classified levels, we had scientists in possession of alien technology and bodies. Now, I had pretty much believed that up to that point. But here's the thing. When you get someone of a certain stature who tells this to you, and they know that you can out them, by the way, all right? And it's like you're getting this kind of a confirmation. And so there's a very strong emotional impact, I can assure you. And I know that there are many of you in this room that have experienced something similar to this. And so when this happens to the world as a whole, there's going to be an impact there. I don't know how it'll all play out. They're definitely interested in us. Why? There are so many researchers in this field who grossly underestimate humanity. They say things like, well, why would aliens, who presumably have mastered all of these technologies, be interested in such a primitive tribe of people as humanity? We can't get our own act together. But here's the thing about us. We are intensely fascinating. We really are. We've got all these crazy emotions, for one. For another, we're pretty clever, really. And we're on some kind of trajectory that's just crazy, man. We're going like this, straight up. 1 century ago, we had horses pulling carts. And we go from that to cars, aircraft, atomic weapons, electronics, computers, fiber optics, artificially intelligent computers very soon are on the way, where your computer will be talking to you. I've been interested in the future of AI for some time. I'm no expert, but I read the books. What's crazy is when people think UFOs are a whacked out field, they should read some books on the future of AI. And those people are very mainstream. They get a lot of money for their research, by the way, and they're all saying really the same thing, which is that roughly 20 years from now or less, your computer will be telling you it's conscious. It's a conscious entity. And you may believe it or not, but part of you is going to believe it because it will seem like it. It'll also be able to do a quadrillion number of calculations per second, and it'll also be able to pull any data off the web instantly. So maybe it'll be a little smarter than us in a lot of ways. And when that happens, that will transform the dominant intelligence of our civilization, right? And when that happens, a lot of things that seemed impossible will not seem impossible. And that includes getting a definitive answer to this mystery that we're dealing with, I think. I think we're going to see that happen. So my feeling is they know we're at that stage. As I've stated in my book, we're about to leap into their world. Only, most of the time, we've actually been in their world, but we've been asleep. Now we're about to wake up. And I think they know this. You know, ending this impasse, I don't really know what the trigger is going to be. I don't know how it's going to happen. The only way that I can see it is I try to look at this big picture, and I see our society in such a dramatic transformation that I have to assume that, just like that song says, something's got to give. And you cannot bury the truth forever. The truth is going to come out. We are living in a time that is so radical. Transformations are constant. It's going to happen. The trigger is something I don't know yet, but I believe it will happen within 1 to 2 decades. That's considered conservative in this field, by the way. I don't think, I mean, maybe it'll happen tomorrow, but I think 10 years is safe. I think 20 years is very safe, where it becomes open and obvious that we're living in a world where these other entities are here. And then we're going to have to struggle. I'm about to be ready to close here. I see that I have 8 minutes, and that's about right. I don't think that I'll have time for Q&A. However, I will be available for the rest of, well, today and tomorrow all day. And I'll be very happy, to talk with all of you, answer whatever questions, chat, learn whatever. I always learn more than you do when I attend these conferences. That's no lie. And I'm very happy to do that while I'm here. I'd like to caution against a couple of things. Against utopia. I'm not a utopian. I'd like to live in utopia, don't get me wrong. I would like to have a team of experts spending all of their time to find out ways to make me happy. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. I want to caution against free energy as a panacea. Well, as I've done. I would suggest that it is human consumption, not human pollution, that is our fundamental problem to the global ecosystem. I'm not saying pollution doesn't matter. It does, obviously. But as I suggested before, all this energy allows us to do more and more things, and those things might have negative impacts on the world around us. I'd also like to caution us against having the Galactic Federation save us or bail us out. Again, I'm not saying that there aren't good entities there, and I'm not even saying there isn't a Galactic Federation, although I see no evidence for this, but maybe there is. I'm just saying I don't think that there are easy solutions to the problems that we have. And I want to be very clear about what I'm saying here. Ascension to the next level of consciousness. I hear about this a lot. Everyone hears about this. 2012 is going to be, we are told, the ascension, where we go to the next level, next density, next consciousness. Look, we need to develop the highest level of consciousness and awareness possible. What I'm suggesting is that it's not going to be an automatic thing. It, like anything in life, requires work. Higher consciousness requires effort. And all of us will have to put that effort in to get out what we need to get out. The problems that we face in the future and the solutions that we find are going to have to be concrete problems, concrete solutions. They are not going to be easy. New solutions inevitably create new problems because that's the way it is, being a human being. That's the way it always has been. I think we're foolish to think that it's going to change immediately just because we find that there are other entities here. What I've been trying to suggest in this lecture is that what we call exopolitics is a valid field of study, but it requires more rigor than has been brought to bear for the most part. It requires more care and more responsibility. And then we can do it. We can do it right. These two books I have here with me. This is my newest book, UFOs and the National Security State, The Cover-Up Exposed. It's the second volume of a trilogy that I am writing. It's a large book. It's got a lot of information in it. I like to think that it's useful. I would encourage you to come to my table. I've got many copies. I don't want to leave with any. So you may certainly come and buy one. And that also goes for Richard Sauter's outstanding new book, Hidden in Plain Sight, of which I am the proud publisher. This is my website. It's keyholepublishing.com. It's a very easy hop, skip, and a jump for you to go from there and just email me if you want to talk to me. I try promptly to answer emails. I sometimes fail, but I try. I try to be accessible. And I don't see that changing in the future, so good. That's it. I'd like to thank you very, very much for your time tonight. Thank you.
Richard Dolan!
Thanks. Thank you.